I do love how The Simpsons and South Park have made cameos.
White Stripes.
One of the great ways of introducing an artist to an audience that maybe had no idea about them, including Thomas Pynchon, the famous and reclusive novelist.
Well, now all the young kids know everything from TikTok.
Yes.
If that got them into good stuff, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. We haven't used TikTok yet. I've been always reluctant to use all of this stuff. Like, I never used Friendster. I never used MySpace. I never used
There's
Facebook.
so many. It's so hard.
I kind of purposely didn't do it. I wasn't a Luddite. I always liked technology and I would learn things. It was more that I found the faux communication tools to be a ruse from day one. It just obviously was always about data mining.
It's hard to keep up, though. It changes so much. And
with TikTok, one of the reasons we haven't utilized it, and maybe we will, is because there's been this threat that it would go away. So to put...
It already did and keeps coming back.
So to invest all this money in it, to then have it go away. Now, obviously, to your point, there's always going to be like the next thing. Like Snapchat, we never really did anything with because it disappears.
But with TikTok, though, a lot of, when I was a teacher, they're like, my parents won't let me do TikTok. But then the kids go home and they do YouTube Shorts, which is essentially the same thing.
I mean, the one thing I will say I love about the internet, because I come off like a grump sometimes, is that YouTube is probably my biggest hobby, besides hanging out with my kids, in that it's such a great platform. As someone who's a writer, an editor, and researcher, an archivist, people are uploading new stuff all the time. And it's just crazy. It's such a wonderful education. So, like, I guess I should, maybe break a little bit of news here. And, when I was a writer for magazines, I was a profile writer. And so I would kind of follow people around and write these long form profiles or do these long form interviews. And
like a journalist, right?
Yeah, as a journalist, that was kind of my specialty. And so now, I'm not going to stop doing Hat and Beard, but I do need to make more money. So I'm going to start writing these biographies. And the first one I'm doing is Arthur Lee from Love.
Wow.
And I got the estate on board in the last year so that I can get into the archives. There's only one book about Arthur.
Yeah.
When he got out of jail in the early aughts, that was the first issue of Stop Smiling where we did multiple covers. And I think, was it Rebels and Outlaws? I can't remember the theme of that issue, but it was Wayne Kramer from the MC5 and Arthur Lee. And both of them had spent time in jail.
Yeah.
And those were the two interviews. And when I got to LA, obviously, like, I went back down the sort of 60s wormhole of, the Sunset Strip. And I think one thing that's been lost to history is that the Byrds and Love are the bands that created the Sunset Strip, not the Doors, not the Mothers of Invention. That was later.
Right.
It was really in the mid-'60s at Ciro's and Brave New World and London Fog and the Whiskey A Go-Go that these bands, like, kind of created that scene, which, kind of...
That really needs to be told because a lot of people that love Miles Davis' Bitches Brew, they don't know that Tony Williams, his former drummer, really did fusion way before him.
Yes.
But he didn't get the credit.
Totally.
So what you're doing with the Sunset scene, that's really important.
And there's tons of books about the Byrds. I know McGuinn's writing his now. Chris Hillman put out his really great biography a few years ago. But, the Byrds and Love are my two favorite bands of that era.
Wow.
In that, like, they almost changed the genre of the band every album. And back then, they had to put out an album every 6 months. So obviously some of these bands are short-lived. Like the original lineup of the Byrds is really only 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And yet the breadth of what's going on musically on those albums.
And who's come out of there.
Yeah. For like you listen to Mr. Tambourine Man where half the album is like Dylan covers and like Bob and Pete Seeger covers. And then you get to like 3 years later, you're at, Notorious Byrd Brothers and there's like, it's basically like a psychedelic folk record. You get to Sweetheart of the Rodeo. It's the first country rock record.
Don't forget about William Shatner, his version of Mr. Tambourine Man.
Oh, God. Yeah, you're right.
Oh, my God.
So good. He's so crazy. I saw he has a show, and I occasionally will just be like, I wonder how old he is. He's 95 years old.
Yeah, he
looks incredible.
He was on Mark Maron's podcast last year, and Mark said that he drove himself with his dogs in his car to Mark's garage. Like, no people with him, no posse, and he's just like
incredible.
He looks like 30 years younger.
Totally. I'm bummed that Mark's thrown in the towel because he's obviously one of the pioneers of this format. But I'd say, like, because he's such a big music fan, like the Jerry Harrison episode.
Oh my God, and Adrian Belew too. Yeah,
it's so good. You know, they spend like 20 minutes talking about Johnny Thunders. You know, it's
and
like
Mark really knows. I think because he's a guitar player, he really knows music too.
He does, and it's just so fucking
And he finally
brilliant.
got Keith Richards.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so amazing what he's done because obviously lots of young people listen to that and you know, he'll go down these kind of wormholes. The other thing I love about YouTube, and you must know this segment because they've been doing it for decades, is What's in My Bag.
Of course.
At Amoeba.
Well, when Peter Murphy was on there, man.
It's just like, I mean, that's like when I'm drunk at night and I'm like mentally fried and I have maybe a half hour before I'm going to go back inside, I'll watch a few of those and it just kind of rejuvenates my belief in society itself.
Do they still do that since they moved?
They did. Yeah. They do still do it, and it's incredible. Like, I gotta go out and watch the Peter Murphy one. But honestly, in the last 6 months, I've probably bought more records from What's in My Bag. Where I was like, oh yeah,
How about the Danny Elfman one? Everything he picked out was unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, I'm trying to think who was like the new pornographers were there, and they picked all this like weird like. Or maybe it was Built to Spill. Like, it's all, like, Indonesian, like, psych music. Like, stuff I wouldn't have even thought of looking into. Well,
even Criterion now, which I used to buy the DVDs all the time, I love... they have a channel now, and they let people...
It's the closet, the Criterion closet.
Bill Hader.
Yeah.
He goes in there 2 times and picks out the weirdest shit.
I think when we get the bookstore open, I'm going to do...
You got to do that.
I'm going to do some version of that. Because it's not like these people invented that. It's always been going on. But they've found what works for them.
I think that would be great because your collection of things that you have and things that you make is so eclectic that everybody that watches it, you'll probably pull out something that they would like that they never would have heard of.
Yes, and I think it will be them taking stuff both that we make and also books that other people make.
Yeah, and have guests come in because they're going to turn even you on to stuff they don't know.
One thing, I don't know if you ever went to the Cinerama Dome when they had that bookstore in there, but the way they curated it, where they'd have like Carrie Brownstein from Sleater-Kinney, her top favorite 5 books or something, and it would be like, you know, The Waves by Virginia Woolf, and I don't know if they interviewed her, but they would have these little like recommended if you like kind of post-its with, you know, Carrie Brownstein recounting what she liked about, you know, these various books and, you know, Fred Armisen or whoever.
But that's like you're saying, to bring the experience of being in person.
Yes.
I'll never forget when we first moved to LA, my older son Django and I, we heard that Elijah Wood was going to be at Amoeba Records. And we're like, what? So we go down there. He's just doing a DJ set. And there was like 10 people there. But it was so fun.
Elijah is such a great music guy. I don't know him super well, but he runs a film company called Spectrovision with a friend of mine from Chicago, and it's sort of dedicated to modern horror films.
But he also did that Everything is Illuminated, right?
Yes, and so Spectrovision, I'm sure some of it was bankrolled with his Lord of the Rings money, but he's been such a great kind of music fan too. Like last year, I guess it was 2 years ago, when we were touring with the Steve Keen book, the guy who made the Steve Keen book with us also was one of the producers of the Elephant Six documentary. And he was prominently in that because he was just a huge fan of Olivia Tremor Control and Nutri-Milk Hotel. And it was just kind of funny cutting to this like A-list actor amongst mostly just other musicians in there. And that using his kind of star power to promote underground music is amazing. You know, there's
Same thing with Fred Armisen. He does so much to help with music.
He does. And, you know, I've known Fred since I was a teenager. I booked his band Trenchmouth.
He's a great drummer, too.
Great drummer. I mean, before he was on Saturday Night Live, he was playing in the Blue Man Group as a drummer.
I did know that.
And Trenchmouth, the band he was in with Damon Locks and Wayne Montana, they're all still really good friends. We're like basically like a dub group. I mean, it was incredible.
I got to tell you a quick thing about Fred. A friend of mine was like, you want to go to a Fred Armisen show? And it turned out, I can't remember the theater, but Fred was trying to help this theater from being closed down. And at that point, he came up with this whole show about drumming. And so I found out you could only get into the show if you were a drummer.
Oh, that's
and
so cool.
He was at the front of the line, and there's some woman in front of me, and she comes up, and he had a practice pad. He's like, okay, play. And then she couldn't play anything. He's like, get out of here. And then I came in and I did some rudiments, and he let me in. But I found out the whole thing was, it was only jokes about if you were a drummer. So no one else would understand. And then he was testing this out. He went to do it on like Jimmy Fallon and stuff like that. But there's a guy that I work with, a nonprofit company called Muzak.org, and it's a former Larchmont parent. And every year we bring in famous people to play a show, and we give all the money to help kids who can't afford instruments. And I'm telling you this because every year Fred is there. He's so great. He'll either do a solo set, or sometimes we have a band that's him on drums, Moby on guitar, and Tony Kanal from No Doubt. I just want to say Fred is such a great guy, and so humble and so helpful, and so unassuming. You would never know who he is. And when my students ask about him, they're like, who's that? And I go, oh, he's Uncle Fester.
Yes, exactly. Well, what's funny, too, is I found this the other day. The way he started doing comedy, it was a VHS cassette that was being passed around.
Really?
And he went down to South by Southwest, and I used to work in the music industry, so I was there that year, and he was playing, it was almost like a proto-Borat, where he played like a foreign journalist that was at South by Southwest, and then he would it would wait till the Q&A of some famous talk between like, you know, Gary Gersh or whoever signed Nirvana and like David Frick from Rolling Stone. And then he would get up and ask these like completely nonsensical questions in this persona. And his wife at the time was Sally Timms from the Mekons. So she's filming it all. And I think it was that videotape that he just passed around that then he got the gig on, there was a short-lived show on HBO in the 90s called Reverb.
Yep.
That had lots of great musical stuff. And I'll never forget Fred and Rick Gershon, who was the publicist at Warner's in the 90s, who's probably now retired, is probably one of the best interviews we ever ran in Stop Smiling. It's got to be in the book. But at some point, Brian Wilson lived in the suburbs of Chicago when his, I think, third wife, the one that passed away recently.
Yeah.
It might be the second wife. Correct me if I'm wrong there. She had roots in Chicago, so she wanted to get Brian away from all the bad stuff here.
Right.
This was after the like Eugene Landy, you know,
the book
80s psychologist bullshit. So in the 90s, he lived in the suburbs of Chicago, and when he started to play again, it was an episode of Reverb. Fred was hosting it, and he invited us down to this theater, and we got the Flaming Lips to interview Brian Wilson.
Oh, my God.
And
That's crazy.
And this is around the time of Soft Bulletin. So they were, obviously that whole record is sort of so Beach Boys inspired. and then having Brian Wilson, he's such a sweet dude. Yeah. I mean, but he said crazy stuff. Like I remember him saying like, I'm the Bob Dylan of the 90s. And we're like, what are you talking about? So I may have to, if we rerun that in the book, I have to put in context that he might not have found the right meds at that point. This is before he finished Smile, and he was playing these shows. And I remember the way we found out where he lived was there's this huge mall outside Chicago in the suburb of Schaumburg, which, by the way, was the fictional town, not even the fictional town, the town in which they set the sitcom Married with Children.
Wow. Which,
along with The Simpsons, was kind of the first shows on Fox as a network in the 80s.
Right.
And Schaumburg is just kind of this like Motorola's based there. They built the third largest mall in America called Woodfield. And I would see this local ad and it had Wouldn't It Be Nice by the Beach Boys in it. And I'm like, how the fuck did they get the licensing for the Beach Boys for this fucking mall?
Yeah.
Because it was like a local ad. And, I was a journalist at the time and I was still in journalism school. And I remember like, I had access to LexisNexis, which is the network that is sort of a back-end database to all the newspapers' archives that you can't, access through the internet live. And I somehow found out that he was living in, was it St. Charles? It was basically like a posh suburb, and that he liked going to that mall to walk around for exercise. So he's like, oh, okay, let's give him the music or whatever. So then one of the jokes was when bands would come to town who were huge Beach Boys fans, we would have this pilgrimage where I would take the band and see how close we could get to getting to Brian Wilson's front door before the security would have us removed from the premises. I'm trying to think. One year there was a Halloween show, and all the bands were dressed up in costumes, and I think it was Apples in Stereo and Helium, and we went out there, and we got as close as the front door because we were all in costume, so they assumed we were kids trick or treating before they realized that we were adults trying to get to Brian Wilson.
It sounds like a scene from the Steve Martin movie with Eddie Murphy with Bowfinger. When
yes.
They keep trying.
Yeah, I mean, but we were all like super fans of sort of, not so much the Beach Boys, but what Brian was trying to do with Pet Sounds and Smile.
Dude, remember when Smile was just the demos?
Yes.
That stuff is incredible. I like that better than the final album. It's
Me too.
So astounding.
And a lot of that's on the Pet Sounds box set.
Oh, right.
Because they'll have all the alternative takes. And it sucks that a lot of the songs from Smile were cannibalized onto other records. I mean, I'm glad that he finally finished it.
Yeah.
So that like the super fans could have something. But but Fred was such an integral part of all that. And I haven't seen him too much since I've lived here. But, to your point about him just being such a great person about give back, I remember when we started the nonprofit, like I wrote to him and like he immediately wrote a check for like $5,000.
Yeah.
And he was just like, park this towards something cool. And I can't even remember what we ended up funding with it. It was something related to Chicago, I think.
Yeah.
But just the give back that he has done as someone who made it as an actor, comedian, but really at his heart as a musician.
The last time we had him, he did a whole set. He came out with a guitar and a loop pedal, and he just started doing songs. And me as a drummer, knowing loop pedals, you can easily fuck that up.
Oh,
but
yeah.
He just killed it. Everything was right on the money, probably because he's a drummer.
Yeah, I mean, I have enormous amount of respect for drummers, in part because I don't have that sort of hand-foot coordination to pull it off. Like, I'm good at keeping rhythm, but if I had to actually use the, like, kick drum, I remember trying desperately when I was younger to play drums because I that would be the instrument of choice, and I couldn't do it. There was something where I didn't have the hand-foot coordination down.
It's tough. And then try singing. That's a fifth thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, oh God. I mean, the bands
That's why, like, when
off.
I was teaching, I would bring in cajones for kids because it's a little bit easier. Sounds like a drum set, but you sit on the instrument and you play with your hands.
Totally.
You can still get a kick and a snare.
I mean, I do feel like what's happened with Trump, not to bring this back to politics, but I think the arts are under attack in a way that they probably haven't been.
In every way.
They haven't been.
But, I heard you say this on a podcast. I think it was Hyphenate.
Do you know Randy Randall?
I don't, but I love that. I'm hooked on his podcast.
He's got a great podcast.
And you're on there. You said something that I've been telling all my younger friends. I do remember the Reagan era, and you had people like Jello Biafra and Alternative Tentacles, and things may be bad with the administration, but there is a backlash of the creative people. And now I'm just starting to see people being fearless again and just coming out against it and trying to reach out to everybody and find the similarities instead of the differences.
Totally. I mean, I'm hoping that this space, which is, we're calling it The Loved One, which is named after the Evelyn Waugh novel that's set in L.A. that was written in the 40s. There's a great 1960s movie that Terry Southern and Christopher Isherwood wrote the script to right after he did Dr. Strangelove. So it has a lot of the nuttiness in the dialogue.
A good movie. Peter Sellers, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's not one of Terry's sort of best known films, but it's worth checking out. And it's all shot on location at Forest Lawn Cemetery, not too far from here in Silver Lake, over in Glendale. But it's like it's technically going to be a bookshop, but it's also going to be an art gallery, a performance space,
a happening, as they used to say.
A happening. It's going to have
immersive.
A record store component where we're going to sell records. The In Sheep's Clothing guys are going to come in. We had a pop-up record store downtown at the Row for about 18 months. It shut down earlier this year, where it was Shopify's old office, and they moved out during COVID, and the real estate people couldn't lease it. So they reached out to Dub Lab and In Sheep's Clothing, which had since closed. They had this Japanese hi-fi bar down in the Arts District, and it succumbed to COVID. And so they brought me in to curate the books, and they had a little record store in there, and then Dub Lab would bring in all these DJs. And it was sort of an aha moment where I'm like, wow, like, obviously I couldn't afford this space down in the Row, nor do I think it would really work because it doesn't have a neighborhood vibe. It's a real destination. It's kind of like, the Robe is sort of like a bougie mall downtown. But like the idea that it had more than one function and that bookstores and record shops in a way are kind of like in the 21st century are almost community spaces as much as they are a business of something.
It's immersive.
And and my hope is that by doing this, I can avoid the corporate grind of, if we have the shop, which is a like-minded business, we can then continue to make books by having our own shop help us offset the losses of what's happened to the distribution model in the States. When someone told me this a couple years ago, and I think it's not only have I fact-checked it to be true, but it's just a depressing fact. There are more independent bookstores in London and Paris than there are in the United States.
Yeah, I heard you say that in another interview.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
And I think it might even be London alone now, post-COVID. And so we're in business, without sounding too depressing, because I have the world rights to all of our books. So we make them in Europe.
Yeah.
We leave half of them there to be sold in Europe and the UK. They have safeguards built in to protect all their record stores and bookstores. So if you spend time there and you're like, God, there's a bookstore in every corner in Paris and Berlin.
Yeah.
That's why. Because people got involved to ensure that late capitalist greed, which unfortunately in this country...
It's like the Lorax.
Yes, it is the Lorax. I think where people go wrong is to think that there was ever a time where there wasn't extreme capitalism.
Right.
This whole country is formed on extreme capitalism. Like, from slavery to the Chinese building the railroads to the annexation of all of those lands to the freewheeling, kind of nobody had the kind of monopoly power that we had in the Gilded Age in Europe.
Right.
They just didn't have that. They had wealthy people and they had the aristocracy. For sure, but nothing like what we had here. But I think the difference now is the internet age has forced us into this mindset, or forced a certain number of people in the public, where we now worship the people who've destroyed society for becoming rich instead of shaming them like we did the robber barons into having Carnegie fund every public library in America. Yeah. Orson Welles made Citizen Kane as a satirical takedown of someone as buffoonish as William Randolph Hearst, whereas now, we have, a buffoonish president and we have Bezos, having a wedding in Venice with his like fembot, wife, and the wedding, and his super yacht costs more than the gross domestic product of a small country.
While tens of thousands of people are being laid off.
Yeah, it's just, and there's this hero worship. Helen Lewis, who's a great writer who works at The Atlantic, just wrote this book about sort of about the genius myth, that like the idea that we kind of prop up these people who are so-called geniuses. They're only geniuses at screwing over other people and enriching themselves financially, as evidenced by Elon Musk.
All the young kids, I have to tell them who Nikola Tesla was.
Yes.
Not the 80s metal band.
Yeah. Not
the guy that's an oligarch, but this brilliant, humble man that kind of died with no money.
With no money.
But his technology was ahead of everybody.
Yeah, by 50 or 100 years.
Yeah.
There's my friend Michael Almereyda, I think this was actually made during COVID, strangely enough. It's worth checking out. He made a biopic about Tesla called Tesla with Ethan Hawke as Tesla.
Yes, my wife and I saw that recently.
It's pretty interesting because it sort of tells the story that you're talking about, which is the sort of real story of him, not the myth. And there's that, I don't know, who said that sort of, if you have a chance to print the truth or print the myth, print the myth. I forget who actually said that. There's a lot of isms that, or phrases, like Mort Saul for years was attributed to Los Angeles is 100 suburbs looking for a city. Yeah. I don't know if he's actually the one who coined that. But I do think we've reached an apex where the people who are really doing the most good are doing it in a certain level of obscurity.
Yeah.
And the people who are exploiting everyone the most are the ones that are kind of the household names.
Yeah.
But I saw this happen a week or two ago. Apparently, the Swedish guy, the guy who owns Spotify, has been investing in like military hardware or something. So I've noticed all these bands are leaving, and I'm kind of enthralled by it because there's been other reasons to leave Spotify for years.
Joni Mitchell and Neil Young were the first to step down.
But now it's like Deerhoof's doing it. And my friend Aaron Olson, who's in this great kind of synth pop band called LA Takedown. He does a lot of composing for Netflix shows now.
Right.
You know, who are on principle are like, fuck this. This is just a line too far. Like, he's taking the profits that he's making from exploiting musicians and investing in like military industrial complex AI stuff.
You know what's weird is, have you heard of that new show, Nine Perfect Strangers? Because the new season is all about what you're talking about.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
I heard of it, but I've not seen it yet. I mean, obviously, some of this stuff does make it into the zeitgeist, where they'll do a TV show or a movie that's kind of really prescient and is dealing with
what's really going
on. But I feel like it's only a certain amount of people that are getting the inside joke or get the sort of prescience or the nuance.
Well, isn't that what all the oligarchs are trying to do, is keep everybody stupid?
Yeah, keep everybody stupid and also keep everybody poor. You know, like, I think about how much more my wife and I are involved in like activism and doing things, but we're like, once you have kids, and you know, because your kids are older, you almost kind of can't, you can only do so much that's the give back. And
you're trying to survive.
Yeah, you're trying to survive. And I am sort of a hopeless optimist.
Yeah.
Maybe to a fault.
Me too.
In that, like, everything I've ever done, like, eventually someone who has more money and resources than I do steps in and helps me get to that next stage.
Look what you're doing. I mean, a lot of these billionaires may have all the wealth and own all this stuff, but at the end of the day, you have inspired so many people that when you leave, you know, you can't take whatever you have with you, but you're going to leave behind generations of people that read your books and inspired them and kept hopeful.
I hope so, man. I mean, what's crazy is just seeing the sheer amount of it. I guess we'll have a space for this at the store, where if you just took all the Stop Smilings and filled a shelf, and then all the books that we've done even in the last 10 years, even I'm kind of flummoxed by what's happened. Hat and Beard, just to sort of go back to what we first started talking about, originally it was like I was working at the bigger publishers, and I could see what was wrong with what was the old system.
Right.
You know, it was very indicative in a way of what was happening in the 90s with the music industry. That, you know, it had gotten so consolidated that the major labels in the 90s would sign like 30 bands and throw everything against the wall. And then like 3 or 4 of those bands would pay for everything else to lose money.
Exactly.
And that's not like a really smart business model.
Right.
And yet that's kind of what publishing has become in the last decade or so. They're having that sort of digital revolution maybe 15, 20 years after the music industry had theirs. But it's kind of rooted in the same thing, where these things consolidate to the point where they almost become so big, they become irrelevant for certain genres of things.
Yeah.
And so then it's incumbent upon people who are independent people to come back out and say, we're going to make books about cool bands that are being ignored by the major publishers. Because I've seen it, like, a certain book, well, like, that's why the major publishers, one of the reasons we've been able to move into this music book space is they won't touch a lot of stuff unless it fits the metric of this post-digital age, where the band has to have X amount of followers on various social media networks. And I'm always
algorithms.
I'm always like kind of flummoxed where I see like one band, you know, put out their book through a major publisher, and then the others you mentioned the Bauhaus book. I've noticed a lot of the record labels have kind of gone into the book business too, because they may already have the audience and they know how to market to it.
Yeah.
One other thing I should touch on, since I have this here, I just noticed it, was even books that we're making that are both tapping into the cult audience of a film, but also musical history.
I just read about that.
La Bamba. So like La Bamba, like a friend of mine shot this. It was his first film as a set photographer. And he wasn't even the guy that was the set photographer on the film itself. The producer of the film had met him. He was working at a film lab and said, hey, you know, it'd be nice to have another person on set. Rick Morton, who shot all this stuff, the whole book's in black and white. It's so artfully done.
Even I'm looking at the cover photo. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and it's just like, I saw La Bamba in the theaters when I was a kid, and obviously, like, it's the Richie Valens origin story, which also gets into, you know, Buddy Holly, because they die in the plane crash. And then, you know, this is the famous Don McLean song, American Pie. Like, in 1959, when these guys went down in the plane crash, that was sort of like the myth is that's the day rock and roll died, or at least the day that the first wave of rock and roll died.
Right.
Which was the sort of Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, Carl Perkins, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens. But this was interesting because it was like, well, we did an event 2 weeks ago and Lou Diamond Phillips came out.
Yeah, I saw that. I wish I could have gone to that.
And it was amazing to have him there. He looks so good for 65 or whatever he is now. But like almost the entire audience, we did a screening at Vidiot's. It sold out in like record time. And like, but until I worked on the book, I completely forgot that like Los Lobos was the backing band.
Yes. Yeah.
And like he had to teach himself guitar in order to like realistically portray this guy without it looking like he was phoning it in or whatever.
Yeah.
And so some of these things kind of end up having sort of two audiences. Like, yes, this is a film about, the music scene in LA in the 1950s and this sort of ill-fated tour in the late 50s where they die in this plane crash. But it's also like a great music kind of biopic where, the soundtrack for this movie is, I think it's B.B. King, Brian Setzer Orchestra.
It's like a snapshot of an era.
Yeah, it's a snapshot of an era. And and you watch the movie now and it doesn't feel like an 80s movie. It just feels like a classic movie. Yeah. A lot of 80s movies, it's just the style of it and the set design and everything.
So you guys are putting this book out and it's going to inspire a lot of people to go back and check out the movie.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to end up doing later this year, so we did this kind of soft thing where I airmailed in some copies because Lou was already going to be in town. He's on the board of governors at the Academy Museum now.
Ah.
And
still doing a lot of work too. He's a great actor.
He's great. And so, almost everybody at the Vidiot screening was between the ages of like 20 and 30.
Really?
So it's like, these are kids watching this movie probably for the first time on the big screen because they weren't alive when it came out. Maybe they saw it, on a streaming platform or their parents showed it to them because they were fans. But I'm hoping later this year, there's a cultural center in East LA called La Plaza. And I'm hoping later this year to take over the whole space and have Los Lobos come in and then have some young kids come in and do the Richie Valens songs with them as the backing band.
I got you on that.
Yeah. And it would be amazing to do that. And I have the support of the organization. So, I mean, those guys are almost in their 80s now. Yeah. I think people forget that Los Lobos formed in the mid 70s and really, didn't break until the 90s, besides their appearance in La Bamba. So I'm hoping that will help us stand out,
Thanks for listening to part 3 of The Cuts Are Nuts, my fascinating interview with J.C. Gabel about, among many other things, his publishing company, Hat and Beard Press. I hope you'll join us for part 4 that should be coming out soon. But until then, I would love you to go check out hatandbeard.com. One of my favorite books that they have published recently is called Dublab Future Roots Radio. If you like music, art, and film, this is a book you definitely have to check out. Dublab is a nonprofit radio station based in Los Angeles. Since 1999, we have been broadcasting wide-spectrum music from around the world. Our programming has expanded to include the production of original art exhibits, films, events, record releases, and educational programs related to health, youth, development, education, and creative processes. Dublab is a platform for discovery and the cultivation of next wave music, arts, and culture. So this is just one of many books. In fact, one of 75 books that Hat and Beard Press have published. It's beautiful photos. It's about the underground scene in Los Angeles. There are some really cool interviews with a lot of musicians and artists that I like, including Van Dyke Parks, Elizabeth Waldo, Juan Atkins, Lydia Lunch, and one of my all-time favorite musicians, Harold Budd. While you're waiting, please go to hatandbeardpress.com. dublab.com and check out this book I'm telling you about. It's called Dublab Future Roots Radio. Until next time, this is your host, Malcolm Moore, from Creativity is the Cure. Thanks for listening.